Hey everybody, welcome to CAF Warbird Tube, the show where we talk about World War II, aviation, history, and so much more. Warbird Tube is produced by the Commemorative Air Force, the world's largest flying museum. Our mission is to educate, inspire, and honor through flight and living history experiences. The CAF began the Warbird movement more than 65 years ago, and thanks to the support of individuals like you, we continue to grow strong. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and now our host, Steve Buss. Thanks for watching and keep 'em flying.
Good evening, airplane fans, and welcome to CAF Warbird Tube for this evening. We are glad to have you with us. On episode 202, we explore the fascinating career of Maybelle Blair and the women's professional baseball leagues of the 1940s and 50s. And trust me, there's so much more than just that to this story. So I think you're going to enjoy tonight's show quite a bit. Now, whether you're joining us for the very first time or you're a loyal Warbird Tube fan, we are pleased to have you with us. If you enjoy our content tonight, please don't forget to spread the word across your favorite social media platforms. That's how we reach an even wider audience than we already have. Warbird Tube is made possible by the Commemorative Air Force. If you'd like to find out more about the CAF, our events, our touring aircraft, local units, or how you can be a part of the fun, just visit our website, commemorativeairforce.org. Now, as you're watching tonight, if you have any questions, just type those in the chat box. We'll try to answer them either during the presentation or before we sign off. And joining us now from Huntington, West Virginia, Dr. Kat Williams. And Dr. Williams is Professor Emeritus of Women's Sport History at Marshall University. She's authored 3 books, including the one we're going to talk about tonight. And through teaching, scholarship, and advocacy, she has dedicated many years to the preservation of girls and women's baseball history. We'll talk about that tonight. And she continues that work as CEO and founding member of the International Women's Baseball Center. So with that, Kat, welcome to the show. We are so pleased to have you with us tonight.
Thank you so much. This is very exciting. I'm happy to be here, and certainly happy to talk about the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League.
Excellent. And we have to mention also that you're a pilot yourself. So we were talking about aviation before we came on the air. In fact, yeah, we talked baseball and then we talked flying. It was wonderful. My two loves. I have to admit. So thank you for bringing that up. I don't want to overstate my prowess, but it has been a lifelong dream, and so I'm all the more excited to be here and talking to you guys. How did you find your way to doing sports history in college as a professor? Well,
the thing is, I was one of those stories. When I was growing up, this was long before Title IX. I played baseball. I played baseball in the neighborhood. I played on the street. Girls were not allowed to play in Little League, or we didn't even really have softball teams to speak of, church leagues and things like that. But I was a good ball player, and I loved the game. Both my parents were big baseball fans. And when I was a little kid, we listened to it on the radio. We were big Cincinnati Reds fans and still are. And so I grew up with a love of the game, and I had a talent for it. I was a pretty good ball player. So it was always there. And then there was always that frustration, right? That it's like, well, I can't play. And then, but I would play with the boys after school. And then on Saturday, they'd get to put on their real live baseball uniform and go off to Little League. And I will never forget what that felt like. And so as, fast forward a lot of years, I did play competitive fast pitch softball because that was what was available to me. But I was already in starting high school in 1972 when Title IX was passed. And, we didn't have those opportunities. And so I didn't know it at the time, but I realize now in hindsight, my own story, my own, quest to try to play the game fueled a lot of that interest. And my PhD is in U.S. history. And so when you're in a doctoral program, you focus in a particular area. And for me, that was mid 20th century, World War II era, And you know, as we all know, the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League were part of that. So all of those things kind of came together for me and ended up being just it was a godsend. When I met those women for the first time and really kind of put my foot on that path, it was it really led me to places I never knew I would be able to go.
Well, and as a student of history, as we were talking before we came on the air, you really emphasize the fact that we need to round out the entirety of, especially not only just history, but if we specifically look at World War II, yes, there were significant battles and generals and you know, important dates and things to remember, but there was also other aspects, the home front, Rosie the Riveter, and these women played right into that as well.
They did. And, you know, when I taught for several years, I taught a class called World War II on the Home Front. And, you know, most of the students are, if they're interested in World War II, they're generally interested in the military history aspect of that, which is obviously an extremely important piece of it. It's not my area of expertise, but so they would bring that knowledge. But then what I tried to do is to say, yeah, but who's making that ammunition? You know, who's doing the work at home? Who's working in the factories and making parachutes and, you know, whatever, uniforms, whatever it is. And so there's such a rich history in that period, that World War II period. There's a rich history on the home front. And baseball is part of that. You know, we all like to call baseball America's favorite pastime. And, you know, there was a real fear during World War II that the game would end, that there would be a break. And, you know, FDR said, no, this is an important thing. And those guys in Europe and in the Pacific, they need to know that what they're fighting for is who we are and those things. And baseball certainly was part of that. And so the All-American League stepped up into that. And so it became a really important piece of World War II history.
How did the league start?
Well, there were, as the war was getting underway, as everyone knows, after Pearl Harbor, the offices, the recruiting offices were just overrun with some men that were actually too young to join and some that were actually too old to join, but they all did. And that included baseball players. And certainly initially, it was a lot of minor league players. And so owners such as Philip Wrigley, who owned the Chicago Cubs, were not as concerned initially. But then they also realized, you know, we have some baseball fields sitting empty all around the Midwest. And so in 1943, Philip Wrigley and 4 or 5 other businessmen, owners, decided that, you know, we need to first of all provide some entertainment. We need to keep baseball going. And why not in these Midwestern cities where we have these minor league ballparks? And at the same time, softball had become an extremely popular sport. Now, most people think softball is a sport for girls and women, and it isn't. In fact, in 1939, it was created by men in Chicago so that they could play the game indoors during the winter. It was never meant to be a sport for girls and women. But softball, by the time we reached the 1940s, softball was extremely popular, both for men and women. And at the time that Wrigley and the other owners were thinking about putting some leagues together, they knew that. They knew that it was extremely popular. And so they came up with the idea of doing a professional women's softball league. And so the league started out as a softball league. Many of the women that they recruited were softball players, as was Maybelle. And so they had also played baseball like so many people, in the fields and on the streets and things. So the league started in that context. Now, Wrigley only owned the league for a year, and then it was bought by his marketing director, Meyerowitz. And so it became, at first, people were sort of like, oh, it's this novelty thing. Girls can't play baseball. Girls can't play softball. But they quickly realized these women were actually quite talented. And the league lasted for 12 years. So it started out in that World War II, let's kind of, keep things going. But it ultimately became something that was quite popular. And certainly during that 12 years, I think it was 1948 maybe, that they reached over 1 million fans.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is there a reason, in looking at the map of where the teams were, is there a reason that they were all sort of concentrated in the Midwest?
Some of that was because of Wrigley and where it started, and some of it was travel was easier. I mean, we were, during the war, there's gas rationing, there are all kinds of restrictions in that way. And in that Midwestern area, there were so many available fields and small stadiums here and there. And so I think a big part of it, though, was travel. And that was sort of the core location for Wrigley and some of those owners.
Right. Yes, it very concentrated around the Chicago area. I saw there was a team in Milwaukee, one in, I think, Kenosha or Racine, Wisconsin.
Yeah. Both.
Minneapolis seemed like very far away from where everyone else was.
I know. Yeah. They weren't around very long, but there was one. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about Maybelle Blair. First of all,
sure.
She's got an amazing story, which we'll talk about. But how did you meet her?
And for your listeners that have not yet read the book, please do. But I want to say that this story is a little bit of a spoiler. In 2003, I went to the former players have a players association, and that was established in 1988. And they have a reunion every year. And so I started doing research. I went to the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, where Tim Wiles, who is the archivist there, told me about these women and said, hey, they have a players association, and if you join, you can go to their reunions. And I thought, what? So I did. And so as it turns out, in 2003 was their 60th anniversary. So I showed up in Syracuse, New York, terrified. I mean, I'm not a very shy person, but, I walk into the lobby of this hotel and it is full of gray-haired women, all of them chatting and talking, and they all know one another. And I thought, I don't know. I don't even know if I should talk to these people, but they were wonderful and they were very friendly. And I met so many of the women. So the next year I went back to their reunion and I'm standing in the lobby, and this very flashy woman with long painted fingernails and sunglasses she's coming down this escalator, and people are yelling up to her. It was Maybelle Blair. And I didn't know at the time who she was, but the second her feet hit the floor, she started telling stories, and as is still the case, by the way, at age 98, people just surround her. And so all these young women were there, and she was telling stories, and eventually the story stopped. And she turned to me, and I wasn't really part of the conversation, but she turned to me and she said, "You coming to the bar?" And I was like, "Yeah, I guess I am." And so since 2004, I have been following Maybelle Blair around. And so she, you know, our connection was immediate. And I was enthralled with her as a person, but also her stories. But we became family. You know, she was at my wedding. I have been there for her. We have been and are both founders of the International Women's Baseball Center. So from that time till this 20 years, she has been an extremely important part of my life. And her stories never cease to amuse me.
Well, good. And speaking of stories, let's start at the beginning for her.
Yeah, there she is. Yeah, she was, of course, grew up during the Depression, and she talks about just how incredibly poor they were. And, you know, in that sense, her story is not different than so many others. But the one thing that she remembers and believes really helped them is that they were a family that loved baseball. Her father was a good baseball player, had played baseball in Texas before they moved to California. And her brother, who is a few years older, was a good baseball player. And so they played baseball, you know, and those stories of, you know, you go out in the open field and you play baseball. And from the time she was about that age, probably, her brother would put her on he would get an old gate and attach it to a tractor to drag the dirt. And so he would put her on that gate and use her as a weight. And she said, "Kat, I was bouncing around back there and the dirt was hitting me in the face." And she said, "I've just never been happier in my whole life." And so for them, you know, the Depression was, of course, it was horrible, and they worked hard. Her father worked in a quarry for $1 a day. And you know, it was a difficult time. But I think if she were here, she would tell you, you know, but we listened to the Chicago Cubs on the radio, and we went out and played baseball. And then on Sundays, we'd go find a baseball game to watch. And so that was the beginning. You know, her whole life was tied up in that game and the love of that game.
And when you put that in historical context, baseball and at the time radio as well, that was the relief from all the not good things that were happening around people.
Absolutely.
It was a release. It was something to do that didn't have anything to do with worrying about money or working conditions or anything else. It really,
That's right.
And I think that cemented baseball's kind of you know, place in history as being America's pastime.
Right, it did, and it certainly did for the Blair family. And you know, part of that was, of course, because her dad was such a, you know, into baseball. So was her mother, but everybody they knew was. I mean, it's just they went to the across the street from where they lived. There was an open field. They built a baseball field over there. She and her brother and her father and whatever other uncles and cousins. And I mean, and why not? You've got an open field, put a baseball diamond on it, right? And so it was, and continued through her life. And I think even now, baseball's a lifeline. And I, you know, I think that's one of the reasons that she and I are so close, because it is for me. It always has been. It was when I was a kid. And And so we are not alone in that. We're not special in that. That is true for a lot of people, but certainly in Maybelle's young life, living through the Depression, it was a lifesaver for all of them, I think.
How did she make it to the league? Did she play baseball or softball in grade school, high school?
She in the 5th grade, her brother, who, as I said, was a couple years older, there was a team at the school for boys, and they would play, and they would go play the neighboring schools or whatever. Well, Maybelle wanted to know why that wasn't true for the girls, and so she talked to her 5th grade teacher. 5th grade. She talked to her 5th grade teacher and said, I want us to put together a softball team for girls at the time. And her teacher ultimately said, okay, that's fine. So she tells a story about coaching these girls. I mean, she put this team together. She said, Kat, I worked them too. I put them out there. I had them running. We played pepper. You know, I had them working out. And so then they had a team. And so they played one another and stuff like that. So then she got it into her head that, well, the boys get to travel to whatever the next neighborhood school was, so we should get to as well. So she convinced the 5th grade teacher to convince the principal that they should be able to play against this neighboring team. So eventually they did. They all climbed in, like the teacher's car and some other people, and they went and played these games. From that point till today, she is building opportunities for girls and women to play the game of baseball. And it started because that's what she wanted to do, right? I mean, so she, from that time until now, it has been important because it was also something that she realized was a gift, that she got to do that. And so through high school, she played for some softball teams. She worked at a soda fountain, and the guy who ran that drugstore, owned that drugstore, had a softball team, and she played for him. And so she continued to do that, and then eventually played professional softball. She played with the Pasadena Ramblers, and during World War II, the softball teams that she played for, the Pasadena Ramblers and some others, they would travel up and down the West Coast playing at military bases. And it was a form of entertainment. So she was involved in playing baseball or softball from quite literally from the 5th grade on. And it was as she was recruited by the Chicago Cardinals, which was a professional women's softball team. And it was while playing for them that the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League recruited her to play for their league.
And when was that? What year?
That would have been 1947. She played in the league for the Peoria Red Wings in 1948. Yeah, isn't that a great picture?
Yeah. What position did she play? She was pitcher, right?
Yes, she was a pitcher for the league. She played second base mostly, okay. and that was mostly in softball. And then she played a little bit of second base, but they actually recruited her as a pitcher. She loved playing second base.
Now, this uniform is a little different than some of the others that I've seen, which are usually, a shorter. I guess it's a skirt, or is it shorts that they were wearing? Well,
for the league, for the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, it was a dress.
Okay.
And but that was unusual for the softball leagues and the leagues prior to that. it was either shorts or bloomers. If you go back to the 19th century and early 20th century, it was more of a bloomer kind of thing. Philip Wrigley was determined that the women in this league would be feminine, that they would look feminine. And so the dress thing was a sort of over the top pushback to the image of female softball players in the 30s and 40s who were, whether it's real or not, there was a perception of them being sort of manly, and he did not want that. So the league that we know about through the movie A League of Their Own, those women were wearing dresses, but that is unusual.
Do you know if there was, I mean, was the motivation just to make it different than what people had done before, or is there more to it? I don't know. You
mean the dresses,
yeah,
the uniforms? No, I do think it was an intentional effort to make them look feminine. Also, they had to have their hair done. They had to wear makeup. There's a really famous scene in the movie where they're going through the makeup, and they're going through charm school. And for the first year or so, they had charm school. Eventually, they did away with that, but they were very strict. They could not have short hair. They had to play in makeup and have their hair done. This was an intentional effort to make sure those women were feminine looking, and that there was no question about them being upstanding women. So it was intentional.
And there was also with that, there were also chaperones that were with the team. But at the same time, the traveling conditions and the working conditions were pretty intense.
They were, and you know, there are a couple of things that the former players point to as things they see as an issue with the movie. But the one that stands out is the way that in the movie A League of Their Own, the chaperone was sort of made to look kind of goofy and kind of silly, and they were mean to her. And the players really resisted that because they loved those women. They played pranks on them, and you know, but they really loved and respected those women, those chaperones, and they were part of the team. You know, they were extremely important part of the team. You have to remember, some of these girls were 15, 16 years old. They'd never left home before. And so these chaperones were there to really help, and they did help make those young women feel safer and more comfortable. But yeah, they still managed to get into a little bit of trouble.
Oh,
and
sure.
And you know, they would, as I said, they would play jokes on the chaperones and stuff, but it was never vicious. So
and we talked about earlier, they travel during World War II especially, and then even after that was restrictive, but so how did they travel from place to place?
They were on a bus, and it was sometimes they would play a double header and then get on the bus and travel overnight or for however many hours back to where they were from where their home was, and then get up the next day and play another double header. And I mean, it was brutal. I mean, it was the travel was not easy, and they were not allowed. And this goes back to the dress code. They were not allowed to get off the bus unless they had a skirt or a dress on. So while traveling, what they would do is they'd wear shorts, and then they would have a skirt hanging over the back of the seat so that when they got ready to get off the bus, they'd wrap that skirt around them. So it was a challenge, you know, but as you know, they would laugh and tell stories about that, and it was a challenge, and it was hot, and it was dusty, and it was exhausting. And then they'd laugh and say, I wouldn't change a thing. I mean, you know, it just, for many of those women, it was the best time of their lives. And it doesn't mean that they, you know, they went on and they got married and they had families, and that's obviously bigger, right? But they got to play professional baseball. They got paid to play baseball. And I think that's one of the things that's such a motivating factor for Maybelle. You know, I got to do this. And girls don't get to do that today. And right. They should get to do that today. And everyone should have that opportunity. And I think because it was such an amazing experience, that really fuels her desire to, you know, kind of get back to that.
Yeah. And I think also reflecting on that, you know, the feeling that I'm playing professional baseball, and there are not a lot of others who are. So putting up with doubleheader back-to-back days, or driving in a dusty bus, or staying in not great hotels or things. Right. You just put up with that because you're living your dream.
Why not? Why not? And again, too, we all know, you know, when you're 17, 18, 19 years old, you can take a lot. Yeah, you know, my back may not be the same if I tried to sleep on that bus, but when I was 19, I would have done it and been happy to do it. So, yeah, you know, I think it just, and they really, I think for a lot of them, they didn't think it was going to end.
Right.
You know, it's like, this is what I'm going to do with my life. And so they're loving it, they're enjoying it, but they also are thinking about it as a future. Right. And so it was a rude awakening for some of them.
Yeah. For Maybelle, she did not have a long career.
No, not with the All-Americans. No.
Right. Yeah. Right. Just one season.
One season, 1948. And you know, and you and I first started talking to her about the prospect of doing this book. Mm-hmm. Her first comment to me was, you know what, nobody wants to read a book about me. I didn't do anything. I was not a star. I mean, she'd be the first to tell you, I played one season. I was not a star. And I said, you know, if that's all you ever did, I might agree with it. But let's go back to that little Maybelle on the back of the gate, and then the 5th grade and the professional softball, and let's look at the whole picture. And eventually, obviously, she relented, but she would also admit that even though she only played 1 year, when the former players got back together in the 1980s and formed the Players Association and started having reunions, they are family. They are family. And so that is a big part of who she is. And so the time playing in that league is one thing, but it's the overall connection to that league and to those players. And so, yeah, she had a short career with the All-Americans, but she played professional softball and quite a bit, and was quite good at it.
And when her baseball days were over, she was still playing softball. She went back to college, or she went to college, right? Earned a degree, and then took off in a different direction, blazing a trail in a totally different world. And that was, she got hired at Northrop Aviation, and starting in the mailroom, and she was a chauffeur, but what a career she had there.
Oh my God, it was crazy. And her brother worked for Northrop, and during the war worked for Northrop. So over some summers when she was a young woman, she worked, some summer jobs around Northrop, just doing whatever. And she had done that a couple of different times. It was kind of a, temporary thing. Mm-hmm. And then when she figured out, she went back to college, or went to college to become a physical therapist, and that was not for her. And her brother said, let's see what we can do at Northrop. And she quite literally started like as a gopher. And then she became a chauffeur. She at one point chauffeured Ronald Reagan, and long before he was president, but still. So she did that. You talk about moving up the ladder, right? I mean, she did a lot of those jobs, and she was very good at it. But what she also did while she was there was coach the men's softball team and create a women's softball team. And so she always kept that going, right? And so eventually she was working in transportation, and the person in charge there asked her about becoming a director of the transportation department. And she was certainly not concerned that she couldn't do it, but she said she would do it on one condition, and that is that if they would teach her, if she would only do it if she learned how to drive every single vehicle. That means 18-wheelers, that means everything. And she did. She absolutely did it. And she ran she became one of the first women to head a department at Northrop Aircraft. And loved every second of it. Mr. Northrop, as she refers to him, was to her just one of the greatest people on the planet. He was ahead of his time, and was always good to her. And so she had a great career, and she retired in the 80s. And she kind of was ready to retire, but was more pushed into it because she had some heart issues. And so some health issues that she said, well, maybe I'm ready. And, fast forward to today, she's 98 and she's still going strong. So.
Yeah, she is.
Yeah. Yep. That's her.
So what was her connection to the original, the movie, A League of Their Own?
There was an original documentary called A League of Their Own, done by Kelly Kendall, who was the son of one of the former ball players, Helen Callahan. And Kelly and Kim Wilson did this documentary. He said he grew up listening to these stories, and he wanted to make this documentary about his mom and about the league, and they did that. It was on PBS, I think, and again, that was in the 80s. Penny Marshall saw it, and unbeknownst to anyone else, she bought the rights to it. And so in 1988, after many years of trying, the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League Players Association had convinced Cooperstown, the Baseball Hall of Fame, to do a women's exhibit. And the opening of that exhibit was in 1988. Now, the players didn't know it at the time, but Penny Marshall was there. And so she had already gotten the rights to the documentary, and she was there kind of behind the scenes watching what was going on. And so she was determined to tell this story and to do it accurately. And so fast forward a year or two, and she sent out, she got in touch with some of the ball players Karen Kunkel was one who became an advisor. And they sent out to the former ball players, hey, show up, we're going to do some tryouts. Penny was hoping that some of the ball players, because they could play ball, she was hoping they could also act and play some of the players out in the field. And as Blair said, we all showed up, thinking we were hot stuff, and we were out there playing ball, and we could play ball, but we couldn't act worth a lick. So So they went the other direction, and they had actors and then kind of taught them to play ball. But she was an advisor, not, I don't want to overstate that, but she was an advisor. And then she was part of that last scene. Surely all of your listeners have seen the movie A League of Their Own. And in that last scene, the former ball players come back to Cooperstown and play a reunion game. And Maybelle was part of that. And so she ultimately then also became very good friends with Penny. Penny's daughter, Tracy Reiner, Megan Cavanaugh, who played Marla Hooch. There are a number of really significant relationships that came out of that. And they had no way of knowing what was going to happen as a result of that movie. But it was, well, as you know, I mean, you know, it put those women on the map, and they were kind of, you know, pushed into stardom a little bit, and they flourished. They loved it. Yeah. And thank God that Penny made that movie. And because, you know, most people for years after the league ended in 1954 and until the movie came out, these women would tell family members or people they work with or friends that they played baseball in this professional league, and people would argue with them. They'd say, "Oh, you mean softball?" "No, we played baseball." And so just no one could conceive of it, right? And so the fact that the movie came out and introduced the world to that league was just so important to their history and to those women personally. They finally got a little bit of what they were due.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the movie came out in 1992, and it's been a while since I've seen it. And it was fun looking up the trailer today.
Yeah,
and, so I'm going to play the trailer because when you see it, you're going to remember the movie and all the things about it. So let's take a look here at the trailer for League of Their Own.
I'd like to lead you all in a little prayer. Dear Lord, may our feet be swift, may our bats be mighty, and may our balls be plentiful. And Lord, I just like to thank you for that waitress in South Bend. You know who she is. She kept calling your name.
This summer, Tom Hanks is managing the impossible, the Rockford Peaches.
Go Peaches! Who says girls can't play baseball? Who says women can't throw?
Slide! Slide! Thank you!
Give them a league of their own to play. Then stand back and get out of their way.
That sounded good.
So let's all root for the girls' team. Let's give the poor coach a break.
You're still missing the cutoff man. Now, that's something that I would like you to work on before next season.
'Cause it's fresh, fresh. We're having a bash at the old ball game.
Got him! Columbia Pictures would like to take you out to the ball game for an all-star comedy.
They'll pay you $75 a week.
We only make 30 at the dairy.
Well then, this would be more, wouldn't it?
The manager, Tom Hanks.
Are you crying? There's no crying! There's no crying in baseball!
The catcher, Gina Davis.
What do you say we slip in the back seat and you make a man out of me?
What if I smack you around for a while?
Can't we do both?
The pitcher, Lori Petty.
I made it! I'm a peach! A Rockford peach!
The scout, John Lovitz.
Are you coming? See how it works is, the train moves, not the station.
And batting cleanup, Madonna.
What if my uniform bursts open and oops, my bosoms come flying out?
You think there are men in this country who ain't seen your bosoms?
A League of Their Own.
All right. God knows we have a game. It's not like any of this helps, believe me.
Directed by Penny Marshall.
Always fun to see that.
Oh yeah.
Brings back
Yeah.
lots of memories.
Oh yeah.
Now, were any of the characters in the movie based on any of the ladies who had played, or is it sort of a composite of all?
It's a composite. You know, over the years, I've met a number of family members who insist that their mother or grandmother was, oh, my grandmother was Dottie, or but they were all composite characters. You know, it's which is important because there were nearly 600, around 600 women that played in the league over 12 years. It would be kind of hard to single out, you know, 4 or 5 of them.
Yeah. Plus, there's always a little bit of the Hollywood factor.
Oh yeah, there's definitely a Hollywood factor. Yeah.
Downplay others. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
But still, and whether Penny Marshall intended this to happen or not, it, as you said, really brought these women back into the spotlight and showed the world that yes, they did play professional baseball.
Yes. And you know, I think Penny's idea was to tell the story and to do it in a and God knows I'm not going to attempt to speak for Penny Marshall, but I think it was an attempt to tell that story, an important piece of baseball history, women's history, World War II history. I don't think even she could have imagined the impact that it would have. You know, girls today, 2025, they meet Maybelle Blair, they can recite lines from this movie.
Sure.
They know this movie. They know who she is. They know who those women were, and they thank them. I mean, this is a genuinely important thing for those kids. They still watch it on the bus on the way to their games, and you know, they weren't even thought of in 1992. And it has stood the test of time, in part because it's the only one.
Yeah.
We have a lot of baseball movies. By the way, the baseball movie with highest grossing baseball movie of all time is A League of Their Own. Now think about the other baseball movies: The Natural, Field of Dreams, Sandlot, on and on and on. It's this one. And it shows the importance of that story and that history, and the importance of letting girls know they have a history. They stand on the shoulders of Maybelle Blair and so many other women, and they're not alone. And so the popularity of that movie is an indication of that, I think. If there were 10 other movies, yeah, it would probably still be a great movie, but there would be other pieces for people to hang on to. But there isn't. And so this is it. Unfortunately, it's a good one.
It certainly is. And we see Maybelle here talking to some young ball players.
Yep. She's coaching.
Oh, of course. And meeting and greeting.
Yep, exactly. And that young woman is now a very, that young girl, that was 2018. She is a very good baseball player, by the way. She's
very good.
Yeah.
And she was also, Maybelle was also involved in the Prime video series.
Yes.
That was same title, same sort of subject, but kind of in a different direction.
It was. She was a very significant advisor to the Amazon series. And there, before Will Graham and Abby Jacobson and others made this TV show, they spoke with Penny Marshall before she passed away and told her what they wanted to do, and she gave her blessing. In 1992, Penny could not have made a movie that talked about sexuality or race. And these guys wanted to do that because that's also part of that story. That's also part of the story of the mid 20th century in the US. And it's also part of the story of baseball. And so they did that. And personally, I loved it. I thought it was great. People thought it was a quote remake of the movie, and it was never meant to be a remake. They never called it a remake. What they did was take the story and do a deeper dive into other issues that were happening. And Maybelle is very proud of her role in that. And there she is with Abby Jacobson at the ESPYs, a big highlight.
Very good. What is she doing here?
These are a few of the artifacts that the International Women's Baseball Center has. That is obviously some of the balls and some scrapbooks and uniform and stuff. And we do, on occasion, we do a sort of a traveling exhibit. And she is showing off there with some of it.
And with the Baseball Center, isn't part of your mission to try to establish a professional women's baseball league again?
No. The International Women's Baseball Center is about preserving the history and the legacy of girls and women in all aspects of baseball internationally. So we run Bayer Stadium, the original stadium where the Rockford Peaches played. So we are renovating that. And then we will eventually, when we raise the money, we will build, we have the property across the street from Bayer to build an educational center and activity center for the community and also a museum. We certainly support the efforts to create another professional league. And in fact, just a few months ago, it was announced that there will be a new women's professional pro league that will start in May of 2026. And so I am on that advisory board, as is Maybelle. And we are certainly very, very excited about that and very supportive of that.
Good. If someone would like more information about the center, what's your website address?
It's iwbc.org.
Okay.
And we'd love to have folks check it out. You can reach out to us on there as well. There's also this big fat donate button. If you want to push that several times, we'd be happy to take that as well.
Sounds good. Just briefly, I mentioned at the top of the show that you're the author of 3 books. This was the first one, came out in 2017.
Right.
What's the brief synopsis on this?
This book was basically, I always thought some of the most important pieces of that history was what playing in the league meant to those women. And as I found out, and that's what this book is about, it was crucial to them. They made, in many cases, more money than their fathers. And they sent that money home. They put themselves through college. They became doctors and lawyers and airplane pilots. And they became, in Maybelle's case, the head of a division at Northrop Aircraft, but she also became a businesswoman. And having opportunities, many of these girls and women were quite poor. Many of them were from small towns and small communities, and they traveled. In 1947, they had spring training in Havana, Cuba. They traveled and they experienced the world and they got an education. And so this book is about the impact of having that opportunity on their lives.
Very good. And then your second book, released in 2020.
Yes. Yep. Isabel Lefty Alvarez was one of the young women who came from Cuba. In fact, in 47, when the league went there for spring training, she was recruited to play on a Cuban team that would play against them. And she was recruited, and in 1948, came to the United States at age 15, spoke no English, and came by herself and played professional baseball. Her life, much like Maybelle's, it's baseball is the thread that runs through it, but her overall life story is incredible. Her father was a quote policeman under Batista, and her brother fought with Castro. And so this was not that uncommon among families. And so she lived through that. She lived through that revolution. She lived, and her mother wanted her to get out of Cuba. And she did early on, but then before the revolution, she would have to come back. So she would go off and play and then would have to come back. And so eventually then after the revolution, she was unable to come back. So it was a really interesting, difficult life for her. She ultimately became an American citizen, and she believes that, it's said, she has passed away now, but said that one of her greatest accomplishments was becoming an American citizen, and that baseball was the thing that allowed her to do that.
Yes. And of course, your latest book, just released last month.
Yeah. And this book is, it is a labor of love. And one of the most, it's a small book. I like to say it's a little book with a big story. But I was very determined, and my publisher was determined, that this would be mostly Maybelle's story. No real, I mean, there's historical context and stuff like that, but this is a accessible book, and that was its point. And it tells this incredible story of this woman who baseball was a thread that really helped her through some really difficult times in life. And she is as determined as ever to make sure that same opportunity is there for everyone else.
And I just want to bring this back. We're going to go full circle back to your early days when you said you read, when you were in grade school, you read an autobiography of, or a biography of Amelia Earhart, and there was a quote that you remember about that also applies not only to Amelia Earhart, but to Maybelle. Yes.
I was in the 7th grade, and I was I had a learning disability. I was in a remedial reading class, and they gave us these little books to just read, and I picked out a biography of Amelia Earhart. And there was a quote, and I'm going to butcher it here, but basically, and it's one that I use in the book. Some of us are born with runways already built for us, and if you have one, take off. If you don't, get a shovel and dig a runway, but for yourself and those who come after you. And that quote meant a great deal to me as a young person, and has continued to throughout my life. And when I was trying to convince Maybelle to let me write this book, I was reminded of that quote. And I said, this is kind of what you do. You've been digging runways for a long time. And she still is, by the way.
At 98.
At 98. Yeah.
What a wonderful story.
Yeah. She's pretty amazing.
Just one more time, would like to encourage folks to visit your website.
Yes. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Find out more about the International Women's Baseball Center.
Right.
Like Kat said, there's that nice big donate button up there.
See, it's bright yellow. You can't miss it.
That's right. Any final thoughts before we wrap up tonight?
I just want to say again how just really happy I am to be on this show. What you guys do is so important, and I really appreciate it. I appreciate your listeners, and I hope that you'll take a little time, read about Maybelle, but also read about that long homefront history of that Maybelle is part of, and so many other women are part of. So again, enjoy the book, and if you want to get in touch with me and ask more questions, you can certainly do that. I am accessible through that website.
All right. Kat, again, thank you for taking time out to be with us tonight. We certainly appreciated it, and what a great show. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Steve.
And we'd like to thank all of those of you watching tonight. Remember, if you have any ideas for future topics, just feel free to drop us a line at media@cafhq.org. Remember, if you liked what you saw tonight, please share it across your social media platforms, and we will be with you again with another episode of CAF Warbird Tube coming up next week. Until then, I'm Steve Buss. Have a great night.